Welcome back to Deck Tech for Decks. I'm your host Caleb. Today we are building Shadow the Hedgehog. I think I've done a pretty good job of finding some unique cards that are absolutely broken with this guy, so be sure to stay tuned. But until then, don't forget to click on that whatnot link, claim your free $15 in the link down below. Additionally, you guys can get 10% off all of your Tolarian Library proxies whenever you use code DT4D. So super excited to announce I'm now partnering with Baron of Dice to bring your TCG accessories to the next level. These deck boxes are put simply just eye-catching. I'm obsessed with the leather exterior on these. It just makes the art look super unique, and that's what you're looking for whenever you're trying to show off your deck. The playmats are also super high quality. They have a non-slip backing along with hand-stitched edges featuring that eye-popping art drawn by legendary artists in the space like Ron Spencer. They're also giving me a 5% discount code for all of you guys in the audience. Again, thank you Baron of Dice for sponsoring this channel. Now let's get right into the deck tech. First, we have to read what Shadow does. He says, haste, whenever Shadow the Hedgehog or another creature you control with flash or haste dies, you get to draw a card. And then, each spell you cast has split second if mana from an artifact was spent to cast it. Essentially meaning all of our spells are definitely going to resolve. Counter magic doesn't work against us. They're going to have to get hard removal to deal with this deck. So the whole goal of this deck specifically is I want to take it in an aristocrat strategy. I want to get a ton of creatures on the battlefield, I want to give them all haste, and I want to sacrifice them to draw a ton of cards. Now again, we do have some very unique cards to Shadow in this deck tech, so stay tuned, but again, that's going to be the gist of the deck, and I also want to heavily lean on treasure tokens as our main source of token generation. Crazy, right? Treasure tokens are just absolutely absurd, and there's a ton of cards that allow us to generate treasure tokens whenever our creatures are dealing combat damage. So we're going to mix that with a little bit of a goblin sub-theme to generate our fodder, that way we can sacrifice them to draw a ton of cards. And then remember, 9 times out of 10, a lot of goblins just enter and already have haste, so it's going to synergize with Shadow. We're going to get the aristocrat strategy off, and we're going to be able to generate a ton of value that's going to lead us to victory. I want to kick it off by talking about some of the broken stuff we can do. Again, this deck does have a goblin sub-theme, so Worn Soul Trader is going to fit perfectly in this deck. It's a 3 CMC goblin wizard zombie that says we can pay 1 life to sacrifice another creature and create a treasure token. And then we're also on Krinko, Baron of 10 Streets. This is a 3 CMC legendary creature goblin with haste that has an ability where we can sacrifice an artifact to put a 1/1 counter on each goblin we control. And then additionally, it says whenever an artifact is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, we can pay 1 red. If we do, we get to create a 1/1, it gains haste until end of turn. What happens when these two are both on the battlefield is pretty broken. We can sacrifice a treasure token, adding 1 red to our mana pool, then that's going to trigger Krinko. We can then pay the 1 red to generate a 1/1 creature with haste. That's going to allow us to get fodder to sacrifice another thing to Worn Soul Trader, and that's going to generate another treasure token that we can sacrifice to trigger Krinko. So essentially, we can spend our mana to sacrifice a 1/1, and what that's doing is allowing us to draw cards equal to our life total, because our commander, Shadow, allows us to draw a card whenever a creature with haste dies. Now's probably a good time to mention we're on a decent amount of our Blood Artist triggers. We have Sanguinary Priest, Zulaport Cutthroat. Essentially, whenever a creature dies, we get to deal 1 damage to our opponents and then gain a life. Notably, Sanguinary Priest allows us to deal 1 damage to any target, so this can kind of just axe our opponent's creatures while we're sacrificing things. Same with Mayhem Devil. This is another card that says whenever you sacrifice a permanent, you get to deal 1 damage to any target, which is amazing. This is also going to be another way we can kind of end out the game. It doesn't give us the life gain of our Sanguinary Priest effects, but we still love that effect here. We're also on Sephiroth. This is amazing. Remember, this deck does want to generate a ton of fodder. So Sephiroth is a 3 CMC creature that says when it enters the battlefield or attacks, you may sacrifice another creature. If you do, you get to draw a card. Notably with Shadow, as long as we're sacrificing a creature with haste, that's going to draw us 2 cards. And then he has the Blood Artist ability. Whenever another creature dies, target opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. If this is the 4th time this ability has resolved this turn, you get to transform him, and then he transforms into Sephiroth One-Winged Angel. It has flying, and as this creature transforms into Sephiroth One-Winged Angel, you basically get a Blood Artist emblem, which is pretty cool. And then it says whenever Sephiroth attacks, you may sacrifice any number of other creatures. If you do, you get to draw that many cards. So again, let's say we have 5 goblins on the battlefield and all 5 of those goblins have haste. That's going to allow us to draw 10 cards because of our Shadow and Sephiroth, which is what we're trying to do here. Timeline Cooler is also incredibly busted for the strategy. It's a 2 CMC creature Drix Warlock that has haste and says you can cast it from your graveyard with its Warp ability that says pay 1 black and 2 life. So now, essentially, if we have Warren Soul Trader on the battlefield for 3 life, we can go ahead and draw a card. Not the best return, but remember, we do have a decent amount of Blood Artist effects, so we can kind of offset that a little bit, and if we use something like a Phyrexian Altar, it's going to only be 2 life. So again, there are ways to mitigate the life loss, and it's just too good. Just having the ability to cast this from the graveyard to get card draw is going to be amazing, and it's going to trigger all of our Blood Artist effects as well. Indrixar is also incredibly busted in these strategies. If we have Indrixar on the battlefield, a 5 CMC creature that says whenever you cast a creature spell, create X 1/1 black Thrall creature tokens, where X is the spell's mana value, and then whenever you control 7 or more Thrall, sacrifice Indrixar Beastmaster. This essentially makes every single creature card in your deck free whenever you have something like a Warren Soul Trader on the battlefield, or even something like an Ashnod's Altar, Phyrexian Altar, and Pitiless Plunderer on the battlefield. Because what's going to happen is you cast a 4 CMC creature that's going to generate 4 Thralls. You can then sacrifice 4 of those Thralls to cast another 4 CMC creature or 3 CMC creature, and so on and so on. And then whenever you pair it with our haste enablers like Anger, Enduring Courage, or Fervor, that's going to give all of our creatures haste. And now whenever we're sacrificing these 1/1 black Thralls, and that's just going to allow us to draw into even more creature cards to cast. That's going to give us even more Thralls from Indrixar, and eventually you can kind of just cast your entire library this way. Lightning Greaves is also incredibly busted in these strategies. Remember, whenever we're sacrificing something to Warren Soul Trader, that actually doesn't target the creature, so we can equip Lightning Greaves to that creature. It says equipped creature has haste and shroud, and then we're able to sacrifice that creature. That creature is going to have haste because it was equipped with Lightning Greaves, and it can trigger our commander. Rakdos the Muscle and Poxwalker is also a very, very strong strategy in this deck that I wanted to cover. Rakdos the Muscle is a 5 CMC creature that says whenever you sacrifice another creature, exile cards equal to its mana value from the top of your target player's library. Until the next end step, you may play those cards, and mana of any type can be spent to cast those spells. It also has an ability to sacrifice another creature. Rakdos the Muscle gains indestructible until end of turn. Tap it. Activate this only once per turn. And then you have Poxwalker, which is a 3 CMC creature zombie that has Death Touch, and whenever you cast a spell from anywhere other than your hand, return Poxwalker from your graveyard to the battlefield. So what this does is it basically turns on a huge card advantage engine whenever we have a sack outlet on the battlefield. So what we do is we sacrifice something like a Poxwalker, then we're able to exile 3 cards from the top of our library or anybody's library. Then whenever we cast a spell with the mana from our Ashnod's Altar that sacrificed the Poxwalker, we're able to bring the Poxwalker back. And you can kind of sack it, cast another spell, sack it, cast another spell, and again, that gets kind of degenerate and allows you to get a ton of value. The next part of this strategy was being able to generate treasure tokens. So I really wanted to focus on using the Goblin army that we have to generate those treasure tokens. We already know what Warren Soul Trader does, we already know Pitiless Plunderer, but what you don't know is we're also on Grim Hireling, Professional Facebreaker, and Knuckles. These all allow us to generate treasure tokens whenever we deal combat damage to a player. Notably, these effects can trigger 3 times per combat step because we have 3 different opponents. So Professional Facebreaker is able to generate 3 treasure tokens, Grim Hireling can generate 6 treasure tokens, and Knuckles is actually able to generate 5 treasure tokens because he has Double Strike. What that means is he's going to deal first strike damage and then regular damage, so since that damage is dealt at a different time during combat, it's actually going to trigger Knuckles twice. So again, we get 4 treasure tokens here, we get 3 treasure tokens from Facebreaker and 6 from Grim Hireling, and then they all have their unique abilities. Facebreaker allows us to sacrifice treasure tokens to exile the top card of our library, then we can cast those cards. We can sacrifice treasure tokens to Grim Hireling to give creatures -X/-X, and then Knuckles says at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 30 or more artifacts, you win the game. We're not going for that, but it's worth saying here. Magda is super powerful with our Sanguinary Priest, our Mayhem Devil, and even our Blood Artist triggers because she allows us to generate a treasure token every time we commit a crime, which is essentially targeting our opponent's anything. She only does this once per turn, but again, with our effects that just ping our opponents for damage, we can easily get this off 4 times a rotation, and then we can even sacrifice 3 treasure tokens to generate a 4/4 red Scorpion Dragon creature token with flying and haste. So that is notable. I'm running Zorn as well. This means if you generate 1 treasure token, you generate 2 instead. So now our Professional Facebreaker effects can generate upwards to 6 per combat. combat. We're also running Alchemist talent, which allows our treasure tokens to sacrifice for 2 mana instead of 1. It also has a nifty ability whenever we level up to 3. Whenever you cast a spell, if mana from a treasure was spent to cast that spell, it deals damage equal to that spell's mana value to each opponent. So it can also kind of be a game ender. Goldspan Dragon, also very welcome here. It does the same thing. Our treasure tokens can sacrifice for 2 instead of 1, and it says whenever Goldspan Dragon attacks or becomes the target of a spell, create a treasure token. So it has haste, generates treasure tokens, and allows treasure tokens to sack for double. We love that. Academy Manufacturer is also pretty broken here. It can kind of pair with one of our win cons. This says if we would generate a food, clue, or treasure token, we get to generate all of those instead. So every treasure token is going to net us 3 artifacts now that we can sacrifice for value, or we could just slam Depth Shaker Titan, a 7 CMC artifact creature robot that says when this creature enters, any number of target non-creature artifacts you control become 3/3 artifact creatures. Sacrifice them at the beginning of the next end step. Each artifact creature you control has melee, haste, and trample. What's really good about this is our treasure tokens are now going to be creatures, and whenever we sacrifice a treasure token with Depth Shaker on the battlefield, since that treasure token has haste, it's going to draw us a card. So it's literally just another way we can turn Shadow into Korvold here. This also has a pretty cool interaction with Mahadi Emporium Master, a 3 CMC legendary creature cat devil that says at the beginning of your end step, create a treasure token for each creature that died this turn. So if we slam a Depth Shaker Titan and turn all of our treasure tokens into creatures, we're just going to literally replace all of the treasure tokens that died that turn into more treasure tokens, which can be pretty funny if you ask me. He's also just super solid in the deck because we're doing a lot of aristocrat stuff. Alright, you've waited long enough. Let's talk about the goblins. We have Sling Gang Lieutenant, we have Siege Gang Commander, and we have Siege Gang Lieutenant. These are all goblins that are going to enter the battlefield and instantly generate goblin tokens. Some of them will have haste, some of them won't, but essentially they all have pretty good abilities too. Sling Gang Lieutenant allows us to sacrifice a goblin and target player loses 1 life and we gain 1 life. So we get a sack outlet to sacrifice our goblins to, and then we get to draw off of Shadow while pinging our opponents for damage. We get Siege Gang Commander that says we can sacrifice a goblin. This creature deals 2 damage to any target. Very useful. And Siege Gang Lieutenant says we can sacrifice a goblin and Siege Gang Lieutenant deals 1 damage to any target. So again, we're able to use these to kind of get rid of our opponent's creatures. I'm also on Krinko 10th Street Kingpin. This is one that says whenever he attacks, you put a 1/1 counter on him and generate a 1/1 red goblin creature token equal to his power. We're also on the other Krinko that just flat out taps, and then we get to generate X 1/1 red goblin creature tokens, where X is the number of goblins we control, so very good. Crime Novelist has some very good synergy in this deck. It says whenever you sacrifice an artifact, put a 1/1 counter on Crime Novelist, and then you get to add 1 red to your mana pool. So again, it's basically doubling up on all of the mana we're generating off these treasure tokens. Hedron Detonator is also a very funny goblin that just synergized perfectly with the deck. It's a 3 CMC Goblin Artificer that says whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, Hedron Detonator deals 1 damage to target opponent. Then we can sacrifice 2 artifacts, exile the top card of your library, and you may play that card this turn. So this is another card that is very good with Poxwalker, and it's also just very good to deal a lot of damage to our opponents whenever we're generating a massive amount of these treasure tokens. Awaken the Erstwhile is a very, very messed up card that I just love putting in decks that can abuse it, and this is a deck that can abuse it. This is a 5 CMC sorcery that says each player discards all the cards in their hand and then creates that many 2/2 black zombie creature tokens. So the goal of this is to have a sack outlet on the battlefield, something like Anger in the Graveyard, and now we force our opponents to sacrifice their entire hand. Everybody generates a bunch of zombies, and then we are actually able to sacrifice those zombies for value or just use those zombies as blockers, and then whenever we trade zombies for zombies, we're also able to just draw cards off a Shadow because our zombies are going to have haste. Very useful stuff. It's also just going to pressure life totals if we generate a massive board of zombies because we have a massive hand and then swing them at our opponents because they have haste. What they don't block and what actually gets through is going to deal a decent amount of damage to them. Skull Clamp had to make it in this deck. You equip it to a goblin, it dies, and you get to draw 2 cards. If that goblin had haste, you get to draw 3 cards because of Shadow. Yawgmoth is just going to be another solid sack outlet. We can sacrifice another creature, put a 1/1 counter on target creature, and then draw a card. Remember with Shadow, that's 2 cards. We can also just pay 2 to discard a card and proliferate. Not very notable in this deck, but we can kind of get to a scenario where we have a massive board of zombies and we've just got our Crinkle on the battlefield, pumping them up time after time by sacrificing artifacts. I did want to say we're also on Dolmen Gate. We have a lot of very, very small creatures, so whenever we use a 2 CMC artifact to prevent all combat damage that will be dealt to our attacking creatures, it's just going to be useful. Now we can be sure to trigger all of our professional facebreaker effects without actually losing our creatures. And even if we do lose our creatures, at least we're going to draw some cards off of Shadow. Loyal Apprentice and Lagomos come down before our commander and generate hasty creatures every single combat. Lagomos is also going to make you sacrifice that creature, so it's also just going to trigger the card advantage without a sack outlet, which is very good. And then it has a pretty good ability. We can tap it to tutor for any card in our deck as long as 5 or more creatures have died this turn, and that's just going to allow us to win the game, right? Because in this scenario, we already have a sack outlet on the battlefield, and then we can just search for something like Indrik Sar, and then we're off to the races and able to draw our entire library. Chainer Nightmare Adept is pretty good. It's very solid recursion. It says we can discard a card and then cast a creature card from our graveyard, and it also says whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, if it didn't get cast from your hand, it's going to gain haste. That's very good with Poxwalkers, because Poxwalkers is now just going to have haste whenever it enters the battlefield, and that's just a cool little interaction that's notable. It also might sound a little bit weird, but I'm running Ruthless Technomancer in this deck, but not for the reason you think. It's a 4 CMC creature that enters the battlefield. We can sacrifice a creature and then we generate treasure tokens equal to that creature's power. But I'm running him because of his animation ability. For 3 CMC, we can sacrifice X artifacts and return target creature card with power X or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. X can't be 0. This is amazing with our Siege Gang Lieutenant effects. This is a 4 CMC creature with only 1 power that enters the battlefield and generates 2 red goblin creature tokens. So now whenever we're animating it with something like a Ruthless Technomancer, that's going to net us 3 creatures, and then we can sacrifice all 3 of those creatures to something like a Warren Soul Trader, and then we're essentially able to sacrifice 1 artifact along with paying the 3 mana from the treasure tokens to bring the Siege Gang Lieutenant back, which is absolutely busted if you ask me. I'm also super high on cards like Bolt Bin recently, so we're running Bolt Bin, we're running Redirect Lightning, and we're also just going to run Tybalt's Trickery. It's basically our only mono red counter spell along with 2 redirection spells that allow you to just redirect any targeted removal that could kind of stop you from winning the game. This is also the perfect deck to run Reflections of Kiki-Jiki in. It enters the battlefield and then it's one of those sagas. You get to create a 2/2 Goblin Shaman creature token with whenever this creature attacks, you get to create a treasure token, and then it says you may discard up to 2 cards. If you do, you draw that many cards, and then the last one allows you to exile it and flip it over, and you essentially get a copy of Kiki-Jiki. This can be incredibly powerful because it allows you to generate a token copy of a non-legendary creature. You have to sacrifice it at the beginning of your next end step, but it is going to gain haste. So you can double up on your Mayhem Devil effects, you can double up on your Professional Facebreaker effects, whatever you need at the time, this is going to be able to double up on them, and it's just an incredibly valuable card, especially in a deck that's going to draw you a card whenever that creature sacrifices itself. I'm also super high on cards like Zot's Will recently. This is a 5 CMC instant that says choose one. If you control your commander as you cast a spell, you may choose both. Each opponent sacrifices a creature they control with the greatest power. Exile all cards from all opponents' graveyards, which is notable. I think Graveyard Hate just needs to be ran more. And then it says create X01 Black Thrall creature tokens where X is the greatest power among creature cards exiled this way. So now we're able to generate, I don't know, 5 or 6 of these 0/1 thralls, maybe 12 if someone has a Gulta in their graveyard, and that's just going to allow us to get 12 card draw triggers off of Shadow whenever we're sacrificing these. Running Grave Pact, it says whenever a creature you control dies, each other player sacrifices a creature. Not okay. Seasons of Lost is also pretty good. It's a 5 CMC sorcery that says choose up to 5 paw prints worth of things, which is basically like energy, and then for 1 paw print, each player sacrifices a creature, so you can make everybody sacrifice 5 creatures. This can just flat out be a board wipe and draw you 5 cards at the same time because our creatures are going to have haste, right? Then for 2 paw prints, we get a draw a card for each creature you control that died this turn. That can also just draw us a ton of cards because again, we're sacrificing a lot of cards here. And then for 3 paw prints, which is my least favorite, it says each opponent loses X life where X is the number of creature cards in your graveyard. I don't see us using that, but the top 2 are amazing here. That's going to do it for today's deck tech, guys. I hope you guys have fun smashing your playgroup with Shadow. Wait, what?